Welcome to the Media Cat Magazine podcast. Thank you for tuning in for the next in our series, Rebel with a Cause, with me, Opal Turner. For this series, we are talking about the relationship between creativity and strategy, or in my other words, art, science and logic. All because it's my pet theory that strategy and planning can be a creative's secret weapon and vice versa, and that we overly separate the disciplines in our industry. So today we have the lovely Stuart Lambert, co-founder of Blurred, a ESG and purpose advisory. And absolutely fun fact, Stu is also the husband of our previous guest, so shout out to Joe. We bloody love a power creative couple in this house. So welcome, Stu. So happy to have you.
Thanks, Opal. It's lovely to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm going to dive right in because I have so many questions for you.
In for it.
So before we get into Blurred, because there's so much to do with Blurred, but before we get into that, can you just give us, a lovely little top line on your career up until then?
Yes. I started out in pure comms, corporate comms consultancy, worked at a small PR agency, then moved to a big PR agency, and then found myself at the biggest PR agency globally for where I was for the best part of a decade. I wore a number of hats there. So I think at various points I was head of consumer technology and a sort of global account lead for Microsoft. And then I ended up in the consumer brand practice there, doing a sort of hybrid strategy and creative director role, which I think is sort of very relevant for your theory that you just talked about. And that sort of that ended in 2018, and then Blurred began that year. Blurred was born.
Birthed into existence. And how did you get into the industry in the first place? Was it something that you aimed to get into, or was it more of a I need a job and here's a...
Yeah, definitely more the latter. I think that was the case. It certainly was back then the case with most people in the sort of comms industry. I think a lot of people fell into it. I think as the discipline of communications consultancy has evolved and become more of a craft and a discipline, I think people very much go into it with a clear aim of doing so. But no, I was an English graduate that had no idea what I wanted to do other than write books and be a guitarist. And it turns out it's really hard to do those things. So I realised I needed a job, and I wrote lots of letters to various companies in London and told them I was good at making tea, which that's actually true. And yeah. Managed to get a job.
It's just so important to be able to make a good cup of tea, in my opinion. Not that I'm like disgustingly British, but I am. And so you mentioned that you had like technology roles and you worked with Microsoft. And how did that mix of things come about? Because in my head, at least, and it's probably partially because of where the industry is right now, technology lives quite separately from the creative and strategy spaces. How did that kind of process come about?
Yeah, it's a really weird one. I look back, at the time it felt really organic. I'd been doing a whole mix of corporate and B2B comms work in my previous job at the time, between whatever that was, 2005 to 2010. And then I was sort of headhunted to come and join Weber Shandwick specifically to lead this Microsoft work, the sort of consumer-facing bit of it, which was not actually my background, but lead that across EMEA, which felt like something exciting to do. I've always been a bit of a Microsoft fanboy, which is maybe a sad admission, but I'm proud of it. So I enjoyed that. Worked with some really good people, and then. Because it was sort of consumer brand work for Microsoft, I sort of found myself moving into that consumer brand world a little bit, and I just realized that what I was better at than other things was the strategic thinking, planning process, and I was reasonably decent at coming up with ideas. So I wanted to do that whole piece and not separate it out. And I was lucky enough that at the time I worked with people who were willing to sort of shape that slightly custom role for me, which I did for I did a few years at that agency.
It's interesting though as well, because you didn't just do strategy and creative. You were leading on both at the same time, is my understanding. And so I obviously think of, from the aforementioned ramble, strategy is the kind of logic and science, and creativity is the kind of art and emotion, or at least to a degree, and I'm very aware that a lot of others think of it that way. But do you have a kind of philosophy while you were doing both? Did you develop a kind of new understanding of each of the disciplines and how you could make them work together? I mean, I imagine it was a serious learning process if you were just working with the team around you to make it happen.
It was, and I learned very much by doing it and trial and error and listening really closely to when I was in the room with, at the time, really senior planners, or you'd be in the room with advertising agencies and their planners would be presenting, and I just always consciously listening. And I have a very logical brain, so I was obsessed with sort of the chart, the sort of process and the diagrams that people use to explain and communicate the sort of logical process you'd gone through to get to that conclusion or get to that solution, and sort of just by trial and error, you sort of develop your own way of doing that. And I think what's interesting about it is I've always been I've always loved writing. I've always wanted to write and to I've got a novel on the go that's been on the go for a long time. But I'm sort of natural storyteller. It's what I enjoy doing. And I always think of that as it is a really logical, strategic process. It's very much to plan that out. You have to have a, it's classic in creative writing terms, beginning, middle and end, 5-act structure, whatever. But in sort of professional industry terms, from a strategy and planning point of view, you have to have a really differentiated observation at the beginning. This is true. You told us in the brief that this is the problem. Actually, it's this when we've looked at it, which means if that is true, and it is, then it means the opportunity is really this. And if that's true, and it is, then the solution could be this. And this is how we could bring it to life. So I see it always as a really linear logic process. And the art of getting that down, if you're in good old PowerPoint, each slide should take you through that sort of logical argument. It's always an argument that you're putting together. Can I make it inarguable? Can I persuade the people in the room, like a lawyer does in a courtroom? You know what I mean?
I was just thinking
no room to get lost. No room to you've got to be really hone in on keeping that argument crystal clear, so that your audience in the room has no scope to get distracted or lose the thrust of the argument at all, or disagree with something, because actually you're nailing every point and backing it up and substantiating it. So for me, that's strategy and planning is an absolute logical process. And then when it gets to the creative, I think why I loved doing both things together was because I think my philosophy, as you put it, is very much that the creative is part of the strategy process. Well, there's two that can mean different things with creative, right? And I think there's the creative sort of the ideation process, the coming up with a solution. And I think in terms of solutions rather than ideas, because a little bit more concrete. And then there's the craft of actually bringing that solution to life. And the first part, the ideation, the solution finding, for me, that is part of the strategic process. You've identified a problem, you've highlighted what the opportunity could be, you've proposed a solution, and it's a creative solution. And I love doing that because it's part of this linear argument. and I didn't like leaving it unresolved for someone else to do. Well, when it gets to the craft bit, that's when there's an art to it, and that's, it's coming to life through film, or it's coming to life through photography, or it's coming to life through copywriting. That's where the other type of sort of creative skill set comes in.
But why would you leave the story at the fourth act?
Exactly. Yeah. But I think so many agencies are structured that way. It's really interesting. I found it fascinating that you end up with this sort of baton passing where the planner and the strategist, they'll take you up to Act 3 or Act 4 if you're lucky, and then they hand that baton over to another team to resolve it. You would never do that in a book. You would never have one author do one bit and then you could, but it would be a sort of amusingly disjointed experience. And I think you see that. I saw that in Deck so many times, where one team they'd put up a load of charts and data that they'd pass off as insights, which it isn't. It's just a load of information that they're dumping, and they'd call that the strategy section.
Yeah.
And then you get this moment, right? Here's the creative, and they hand over to another presenter, and it's been written by someone else, and there's just a massive disconnect.
Yeah.
The ideas that then get presented have very little to do with all this stuff that was presented up front. So that's happening less and less now. I think the industry's gone a lot better at integrating all this stuff, but it was something I observed and experienced so much that I knew there was a better way.
Yeah. It is funny though, isn't it? Because I can really relate to your experience of it. Just kind of, it seems obvious to me that they kind of happen in tandem. Like as you explore the strategy and you really define that problem, of course your brain jumps to starting to come up with solutions. Like that's how brains work, no? So it is strange how separate they've become to me, because I physically can't imagine working in that kind of separated way.
I think so much of it's language, though. I think on vocabulary, I think we conflate creative with art. And look, there's a lot of frustrated artists maybe in the creative, advertising and PR and marketing world. And the truth is, we say we're storytellers a lot of time. We're not J.K. Rowling. We're not George R. R. Martin. We're actually we're communicators and we're sellers of ideas. But that's more of I believe at least, that's more of a well-constructed argument that you persuade. It's more like we said before, more like how a lawyer works. And when I think of creativity in our world, I think of it more as a process, more akin to how a designer works, how an architect works, how an engineer works. I've got a brief. The client has asked me to solve this problem or help them solve this problem. I need to work through that problem and help discover and illuminate and then get them excited by what a solution could be. And there's never just one, right? There's all sorts of different things. How that solution then comes to life creatively or artistically through film or copywriting or, however you want to do it. Now that's another stage of the process, but the initial coming up with the solution, this is how architects work. This is how engineers work. This is, I think that's a better analogy.
We're not solving kind of ephemeral problems. We're solving quite concrete challenges with, key performance indicators, things that we can measure.
Exactly.
And so it's not, it's not often that you get a lovely brief that goes, just make people feel better. I mean, that'd be pretty dope, but it's more akin to art, isn't it? And so in the process of kind of figuring that out, was there any, I mean, it sounds, we're saying that it kind of came quite naturally, but was there any specific kind of challenges or joys that you found in building that role for yourself that encompassed both? And, was it the team around you that you think gave you the ability to do that, or was it just kind of a, serendipity?
The joy came from just being able to, your day job being working through that process. Well, it's a satisfying process to interrogate a problem and get to a solution and then successfully sell it to a client. and oddly, I was less bothered about whether we actually got to bring it to life. The true creative team, that's what they really wanted to do. I counted it as a win if the client had bought the argument and sort of bought that logic and that feeling of what it would be like to work with me and us. So that was always where my satisfaction came from. I mean, in reality, I ended up doing a lot of new business work because that's fundamentally, how you go and win a pitch, isn't it? You have the best argument in the room, the most compelling thing, the thing that excites them the most, the thing that they find inarguable, the thing with the smartest insight, whatever it is. So that's what I ended up doing a lot of at that time. And I think the challenge was more around most businesses, and the agency I was working at the time was the same, need to sort of structure themselves or want to structure themselves in a very specific way. And there was a lot of pressure to pick one of those things, strategy or creative. We've got a strategy team, we've got a creative team, we've got a media team, we've got a client service team. You kind of can't be this anomaly. You've got to fit in. Which one do you want to be in? And I did struggle with that because I thought, well, I sort of want to do all of those, all of those things. But I definitely wanted the strategy and the creative. But that doesn't fit the mold of the business structure. So that was where the challenge came from. But now, sort of, having helped found something new, I'm more master of my own destiny. So
exactly, and let's get into that, because I'm fascinated by the prevalence of kind of purpose-driven motivation within people who are multidisciplinary from my very, very small sample. But I think it's really interesting and much more prominent than I was actually expecting. So, how, what, and why did you start Blurred?
I think that the three or the four of us who were there at the beginning and set it up, certainly Nick and Katie and I all come from sort of PR agency background. I think we all had a shared disillusionment with the superficiality of a lot of the work, even when it's ostensibly good work and you have the supposed validation of some award wins and things. I think we all felt, what's the real impact we're driving here? What are the real outcomes of this, really, if we're honest? And there was a belief that we could just do something different and better, and just go deeper with this stuff. But look, that was a sort of founding principle of Blur, that we wanted to ditch all of the jargon and the things that distract, or the artificial distinctions between consumers and corporates and all this language the real world doesn't use, internal comms versus external comms, and that was initially that was sort of what the Blurred name was about, that blur the lines between these things. I think what happened, that the business now is very different to what the business was when we founded it. I think what happened over those first couple of years, as we got up and running, motivated by wanting to do work with depth, we very quickly came to the realization that if you genuinely want to do work with depth, and really begin to understand what true company purpose with a capital P is and what it mustn't be, then you are sort of by definition doing work that is in the sustainability, or as we've come to use the ESG, or ESGP as we call it, purpose and ESG space, because I just want to work with companies that have a sincerity of intent to tackle these problems meaningfully, measurably tackle them, and drive positive impact for people and planet. And that was an organic honing, I suppose, of the philosophy of Blurred, and we sort of got a quite clear argument about what we believe and what we're set out to do, and yeah, it sort of grew from there. And I think what Blurred means now is more that we are, because we're really trying to help companies be better before we even think about communicating it. We are blurring the lines between management consultancy, sustainability consultancy, and comms consultancy, and that's really unusual. And it's a massive challenge to build a business that does those three things, and hire the right people that can do all of that stuff. And if you just said to me 5 years ago that's what I'd be doing, I'd have laughed and thought it was impossible. But we're here doing it, so it's.
I'm intrigued. How did your specific skill sets kind of transfer into the process of setting up Blood, but also how, because like philosophically, how you describe yourselves, that's clear, but how did the processes kind of change in that time period, other than obviously you've added a bunch of stuff that you need to do at the same time? How do you think that was affected by your skill set and obviously your co-founders as well? And do you think that had a part to play? Because you were like, well, I'm not more, subconsciously, I'm more than one thing. Maybe the agency needs to be more than one thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think it goes back to that initial motivation that we were so determined to do something different to what we'd all been doing for the last 20 years, because we've sort of been there and done that. Nick had already founded an incredible business that, Unity, that was at one point one of the most award-winning sort of comms agency in London. We'd sort of been there and done interesting things. We were determined to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. So I think that motivation of doing something that actually the three of us as founders didn't really know. Well, we didn't really know what we were doing, and that was fine, because we were going to hire the real technical experts on the ESG side, on the sustainability side. We'll build the business around those people. Our skill sets are in, the initial vision, holding true to that purpose and values. For me, I think I bring that logic, planning, strategy, process to everything, because fundamentally what we're selling to our clients is, again, it is a sort of inarguable, hopefully, argument that you cannot talk or begin to credibly talk about the good you purport to do in the world, sort of purpose stuff, until you've acknowledged your potential to do harm in the world. So you have to combine these things. You have to have a board strategy that is about protecting value at risk. That's the ESG stuff, and about creating value, and that's the purpose stuff. And then you have to really understand that by creating value, this can't be just a marketing ploy to make yourself look good to sell products. Real company purpose is about, yes, doing it profitably. That's sort of a given, but you have to be contributing to the well-being of people and planet. You've got to disclose all this stuff. You have to measure it. You have to communicate it properly. And there's an avalanche of regulation coming that's making this mandatory for businesses. So again, if we're basically selling that argument, we've got to do this thing logically and in sequence, then that's sort of quite natural to me. I'm learning every day about the sort of ESG regulatory side and the technical stuff there. That's a process for all of us who haven't been hired from that world, and obviously some of the team have been. But the underlying skill sets, I think, of that planning and creative process is inherent in everything we're trying to do.
And how do you? I mean, it might be very complex. It might be very simple, actually. But with I love the way that you put that you formed everything around the experts, which is just a lovely way to talk about your team. How do you help those people all talk to each other and work together in kind of productive ways? Because I can imagine sometimes it's really easy, sometimes it must be quite difficult. Is there any kind of specific processes you've put in place to help the different disciplines work together, or is it simply just conversational and you have everyone in the same room? How do you kind of manage that on a day-to-day process kind of level?
It's an interesting one. I think that we founded Blurred from day one to be really non-hierarchical. We always wanted a very flat structure, have as minimal job titles, everyone be hands-on, and that remains true. So it is a very hands-on team. We've got people like one of our senior partners, Matt Peacock, who's genuinely one of the world's foremost ESG experts, has worked in huge global roles. He's so hands-on, and we're working happily with a 22-year-old grad trainee or intern or whatever. So we just make sure we guard against any of that hierarchy. I think oddly the lockdown sort of helped in a weird way, because with the 9 of us, I think, at the beginning of that, and there's 26 of us or something now. We hired a bunch of people during COVID, and we didn't actually ever meet face to face because we were all locked down. But it's a real level up because we were all just working at homes, all working via Teams, etc. And it was an incredible testament to how well that technology worked, actually, that we were able to still create a real sense of culture throughout that time. Now, obviously, there's much more face-to-face interaction, but we just keep that vibe going, that sense of, all just one big team, that ultimately we've all got things to teach one another. We have weekly sort of fireside chats where people from all levels of the business will just give a sort of hour's talk about something they've been reading about, making themselves an expert in, something they've learned about. So we can all teach each other stuff. But it's very much about that sort of non-hierarchical setup, I think.
And I imagine that kind of attracts, and when you are hiring talent, you kind of inherently drift towards people who are really curious, who are really wanting to kind of learn from others regardless of where they're at. So it sounds like you very organically built a very open kind of culture that just keeps itself going, really, which is kind of the dream, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, no, I look, we have really good employee feedback scores on our employee surveys and stuff. But I've always said the culture won't be determined by Nick or Katie or I. The founders can't impose it. We're just going to be authentic and live the values that we agreed to business on day one. And they are very much the framework by which we make every decision, by which we hire, by which we choose whether or not to work with a client. And we turn down more work than we take on, by the way. But we can't impose that. We can just be ourselves. And that's the sort of initial DNA of the business. The culture will be created by the people we hire and how they choose to behave and act and interact with one another. And I think that's what's happening. I could see them creating it and living it. That's great to see, because it means it's authentic, it's natural, it's not something that you've sort of artificially tried to construct.
Yeah, shout out to the entire Blurred team for being a hype. What I was going to ask you about next, actually, no, I'm slightly distracted now, but it's the thing that you were saying about COVID and combining that with how you've just spoken about your culture. I think it's really interesting because I'm still seeing a lot of kind of agencies, studios, consultancies, etc., talking about how they're still struggling to bring back, quote unquote, bring back culture with people working from home. And I've never personally understood that, because I think, yes, you do have to be more intentional. You have to intentionally put in place times to connect with people. But other than that, it's really just about the people. Like, you and I sitting here in completely different locations, but the conversation we're having, I don't think is that much different than it would be if we were having it face to face, because that's how we've approached the conversation. And so I I'm on a ramble now. But it's so interesting that that's the way you speak about it, because I always think it's about the people themselves and how you come to, you know, a moment or a conversation or a meeting, as opposed to something that is only organically built face to face.
I completely agree. I think ultimately for us, the culture is best summed up by just really empowering and giving people permission to be their true selves and bring their whole self to work. You do not put on a costume. Do not, you know, you are who you are. We've hired you to be who you are. So the culture is just people being themselves. And I think when I hear the that sort of complaint that struggling to get culture back, I think my response is always, are you really talking about culture, or are you talking about, I don't know, socializing in the pub and you miss doing that as much? You know, those are different things. They may or may not be important, but that's a different, very specific thing. Or are you really concerned that you don't have enough people in the office on particular days and you're paying a lot of money for that space and you want people in? Is it sort of, I trust people are working when they're at home, but I wish they were in the office a bit more. Is that really, if you're honest with yourself, is that really what the motivation is? I think often that it's not actually about culture at all, because culture will look after itself if you're a nice place to work and you're authentic and you're living your values, and if you have the values in the first place. If you're not, then I think you'll get found out. You might not have had a culture beforehand either, you know. So, I wonder what they're really worried about when they say that.
Yeah, me too. Because, you know, it's also kind of like, did you actually not have the culture before, or was it just better hidden because everyone was in the office?
Yeah.
Or is it, as you say, about going to the pub? It's so interesting, and it does concern me at times when, with that rhetoric kind of coming back, because I was used to it when everyone was working from home at first, but as someone whose health has dramatically improved from being able to work from home, I'm like, no, don't gaslight me into thinking that this is actually negatively affecting the culture. You're not coming to it with the right attitude.
Yeah, there's a lot of businesses pushing to get people back into the office more. There's a huge and powerful lobby that wants and needs that to happen. If you think of the amount of money wrapped up in commercial office space and the, you know, amount of money that companies have committed to leases, I can't sort of get it, but I don't think you're going to put that stopper back in the bottle. The genie's out, and the best people, they want that flex. It's non-negotiable now. They're going to need and want that flexibility. With our office, we said this right at the beginning. I think we said it before COVID, actually. We closed the office on Mondays and Fridays anyway. So the office is only open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So everyone works from home Mondays and Fridays. The team love that because it gives you the opportunity to, you know, look, if I want to go and see my parents for the weekend, I can stay there and work that from home on the Monday. It just means I'm not driving Friday night and driving back Sunday. You know, little things like that make a big difference. No one wants to be in the office on a Monday. It's always just, you know, beginning of the week status meetings, and half the day is meetings to get the week set up. Do that from home. So we're Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday anyway, and I think I sense that's sort of the balance that most enlightened businesses are settling on, sort of 50-50, 3 days, you know, that sort of we don't mandate that people have to be in those 3 days. Most people are in at least 2 of them. So it was all sort of, I know there was a lot of angst about how will we get people back, and will creativity suffer because, you know, you need the interaction, and this apocryphal water cooler that apparently everyone is obsessed by, where apparently the best conversations in the world happen at water coolers. I can't remember this ever happening in my life, but whatever. Don't even have a water cooler in the office. But we just sort of left it. I remember saying, people will want to come back in because the only way you see your friends after work in London is
also that
by being in the centre of London, so everyone can So come the summer months, lo and behold, people were starting to come in because they want to go and have an evening and see their friends. No one wants to be at home constantly. So I think a lot of it is worrying about nothing, to be honest.
So it does sound like, though, it is that constant thing of just give your employees agency over what they're doing.
Just treat them exactly.
They are adults.
Grown-ups. I don't need to police how and where you do the work. I just want the work to be really good. I don't really care if I don't need to how long it took you, to be honest. We don't measure on time. We don't price on time for this. We don't have hourly rates because look, if you can do brilliant work in 1 hour,
go for it.
And then you go and have an hour to yourself. Brilliant. You know what I mean? I don't need to know that you did it more quickly than you've said you did it. Or yes, just trust everyone to do the job.
Sounds so simple when we put it like that, doesn't it? It's so simple. Sorry, I totally took us off on a tangent there, but I was just really interested in how those things kind of combine to create that really positive culture. One of the things I was talking about, and I guess to a point, this will probably resonate with you from your previous years before Blurred more than now. But I was talking to Isabel Bale on a recent episode, and one of the things we talked about, that Joe and I actually also talked about as well, is cognitive dissonance. And I'm wondering, have you experienced much of that in your life and career? Did you feel that at the old kinds of PR agencies that you were at? Was that part of the problem? You felt like you were believing in something and not fully acting on it, and that was what inspired Blurred? Or could you just, share with us a little bit about if you've had any experience with that?
I think a bit of it especially early on in my career, where you were, you're relatively junior, and I remember just thinking, what is the point of any of this? What is the point of what I'm doing here? Filling in spreadsheets and phoning journalists about things they don't care about. And then you proudly, in sort of old-fashioned traditional public relations world, it was you were measured on getting coverage. This word I hate, getting coverage for your client, getting the mentions in the news, and because the pressure was on to, we got 8 articles mentioning them last month, so this month you have to get 9. You come up with clever ways of doing it, But I right from day one, I remember looking at it going, what's the point in any of this? What does that mention, out of context mention, do? It's you see less of it now, but the nonsense survey stories, pet food company X has surveyed the British public to find out, I don't know, what coloured dog they like the best. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense stories that, get a company a name check in a newspaper, and we've all convinced ourselves that this is meaningful. It isn't. So yeah, I guess I did always experience that, in the sense of I thought my job was pointless for a long time, but I kept doing it because I didn't know what else to do. But I think that did evolve and feed into the sense of like a lot of the work that the creative industries, and I mean advertising, marketing, PR, digital, all that together. A lot of the work is pretty superficial. It's wafer thin. There's some incredible work, don't get me wrong, that drives real change in the world and is driving real impact. But I guess my cognitive dissonance was when I looked at that, I said, yeah, but the starting point for that work, the work that's really made a difference to the world, the work that's really helped some people somewhere, or tackled a problem, or addressed an inequality, the starting point for that wasn't an advertising brief or a PR brief, was it? It was the company saying, we want to fix this problem. Can you help? Yes, we can help. And then we'll be able to tell a great story about that because it's great. I just think there's a degree of self-delusion in the industry where we tell ourselves that isn't true. And actually that definitely has fed into Blurred, because it's what we want to be doing is working with the board at the top, the CEO, the CFO, helping them understand what the harm they cause in the world is, how they need to fix that, and then through fixing it, how you create a really good story to tell creatively. Same sort of end result in a way, but a completely different motivation and starting point. And it's, the brief comes from a different place and a more sincere place.
Yeah, it's almost like sometimes we talk the talk very well, and sometimes the talk turns into the walk. But ideally, we'd start with the walk first.
100%. Well, and that's sort of, that is blurred in a nutshell, I suppose. That is the argument we make. We'll help you walk the walk first as a non-negotiable. That's what we do. We won't even talk to you about talking the talk until we know that we're walking the walk.
Love that. I think the world could do with more of that in general. So our theme for the month at MediaCat is hope and kindness, which is just everything. And I don't know if it's just me. I wonder how much you've experienced this, because so much of your work is so strong and powerful, and you really set that stake in the ground and it does not budge. How much do you feel like you get? What reaction do you get from people? Do you get negativity, or do you get more of that kind of hope and kindness? Because I always think that, like, if you're angry enough at the world being broken to fix it, that's an inherently optimistic act, because you believe that you can fix it. But I'm interested on your experiences of that, especially when you first started doing it. I imagine it was more rare, and obviously, as you say, you're pretty much the only place that does what you do.
Yeah, we had this realization probably this time last year, where the nature of the context where we're starting all the time, and genuinely reading the science and reading the IPCC reports and properly doing what Greta Thunberg does and read this as a reason why she's so angry and sort of depressed. And we realized it's depressing stuff. It's really scary. It's not pleasant. The team that has to have a mental health impact on all of us, right? Because you're just reading how screwed up the world is constantly. And then individually, people will be pessimists or optimists, whatever, but fundamentally that's quite tough. So we do a lot of sort of stuff on the mental health support side, actually. But one of my big themes for this year, which I said before Christmas to the team, was hope and optimism and conviction in every company and every individual citizen's capacity to drive positive change. That has to be Blurred's viewpoint and tone of voice message constantly. We're not here to remind everyone that there are some really big problems in the world and then sort of wallow in the misery. Now that comes from me personally, because I'm very much an optimist about our capacity to fix the problems we face. I think they're huge. I think we're in for decades of real difficulty, but I 100% believe in in humankind's capacity to engineer and create and think and act our way out of the problems we've caused for ourselves. And it is for ourselves, by the way. One of my bugbears is this save the planet rhetoric. The planet's fine. Can I just point out, the planet doesn't care whether we're on it or not.
Be good without us.
It'll be better with us. In fact, I had this chat with the team this week. The planet has had 5 mass extinctions before. 4 of them, in fact, were total extinctions going back billions of years. We're living through the 6th one right now. That's happening. It's not up for debate. Scientific fact. Things are bad. You read books like David Wallace Wells's This Unhabitable Earth, which is sort of the famous one. And as it will tell you, things are worse than you think in many ways. But this is the first time also anywhere on this planet, anywhere in the universe, as far as we know, that a species has evolved to have the self-awareness to actively manage its impact on the environment and the entire planetary system. It's up to us. It's up to us, people, humans. what a responsibility we've got, yeah, because we've created some massive issues. But my God, what an honour, what an opportunity. So my message is always, I've got young kids, so I have to believe this. This is the best time to be alive. Never before, despite the problems, never before have the actions of every individual mattered so much or had the potential to make a difference. So you want purpose? You got it right there, people. We've all got purpose if you choose to embrace it. So I'm a big believer in banging that sort of optimism and conviction drum. And there's and shut me up if I'm going on too long, because I could talk about this for hours.
Please.
There is so much good news out there. We don't read it. The news industry doesn't work on the basis of good news. It doesn't sell newspapers. It doesn't generate clicks. But there is so much out there. And where I mentioned Greta Thunberg, love her, what an incredible person. But where she's very wrong, she's right that we're facing a huge problems and climatic tipping points. But where she's actually very wrong is that in her sort of she paints a picture of total global inaction by companies and governments, and it's just not correct at all. There is abundant evidence of real action everywhere, from the rapid adoption of renewables. You look at the offshore wind in this country, in the UK, it's incredible. We've got Dogger Bank opening this year, completely clean wind energy for 6 million homes. That's a quarter of the country's homes. There's increasing adoption of that in emerging markets. The International Renewable Energy Association's projection is half of all power in India will be renewables by 2030. That's incredible progress. We've got a swathe of new EU ESG regulations that will mandate in law that all companies with a footprint in the EU have to align with the 1.5 degree pathway. We've got financial frameworks such as GFANZ, explicitly designed to drive capital money towards genuine decarbonisation. These are like the big things that are happening. And then there are countless stories of individual humans doing incredible stuff. If you read Charles Clover of the Blue Marine Foundation, incredible guy, incredible organisation, his book Rewilding the Sea, where he talks about incredible work they've done to generate hundreds of thousands of square kilometres of sea as marine protected areas. George Monbiot's book last year, Regenesis, we sort of you're nodding, you've seen it, but really digging into just how damaging a lot of big scale farming processes are. But he talks about the guy Ian Tollerhurst in there, who's it's just one guy on a plot in Oxfordshire pioneering organic farming and new ways to regenerate the soil. These are small actions, individual human beings, but collectively, millions of people doing that. There is real change happening, and I think it's important we know that and believe in it and feel inspired by it, because what's the alternative? It's sort of sitting back and just resigning ourselves to things just getting worse and worse and worse, and we've got no power to do anything. Of course we do. And that was a long answer.
No, I love it. I was literally going to ask you, do you have some examples, some stories of hope? And you've just given them to me without me even having to ask. So thank you for that, because I certainly feel a lot better. So I think everyone listening probably will too. It's interesting though. I do think it's starting to kind of seep into kind of wider cultural moments, because I know you're a sci-fi fan like I am. And I wonder if you've kind of heard, pointing to many books. Have you heard and engaged in this kind of hope punk genre that's been around for a while, but is kind of bubbling up again? And for anyone who doesn't know, the kind of definition is briefly described as stories that free the soul from darkness. And it's interesting because it's bubbled back up again because of this show, The Last of Us, being out, and it is about essentially the destruction of the human race, but finding hope within that space. And so I wonder if that's something that you think is kind of bubbling into the wider culture as well.
Yeah, I've got I'm sort of skeptical of the terminology, the hope. People love to create new labels for things.
Yeah, they
Part of me goes, many, maybe most stories going back for centuries, thousands of years, have fundamentally been grounded in sort of, that's what fairy tales are, right? I mean, we talk about fairy tale ending, people go through struggles and then everything's happy at the end. I think the Hope Bank is a real reaction to the grim, dark genre that we've seen with Game of Thrones and writers like Joe Abercrombie, who I love, like really brutal, miserable, depressing, dark stories where there's no hope at the end of it. Really, things are just screwed. But I think that bucked the trend, whereas the hope punk movement is probably more of a return to just more hopeful storytelling. I know that they often include Lord of the Rings in it, you see, because which is obviously not a new book at all, but is always listed as a hope punk. But yeah, no, I think I don't know that I've observed it as a trend. I do think that stories of hope and optimism and belief in an individual's capability to create a positive impact and make a difference. I think there's a need for it, and I think if there's a need for it, there's probably an appetite for it, and that will drive the market for more of those books. I mean, I mentioned a couple of books already, like George Monbiot's and Charles Clover's thing, but I think the most life-changing book I read, or two actually, in the last year, was Humankind by Dutch historian Rutger Bregman, which it just completely, with data and with facts and evidence, points all the way through, points out just actually how amazing human beings are, how fundamentally kind and well-intentioned and sincere we are. Because I think we think the worst of ourselves too often, and it was a real epiphany. And then talk about sci-fi, Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future. I tell everyone about that. Read that about a year ago. It's ostensibly a science fiction novel set in the very near future, but it's really a blueprint, a meticulously researched blueprint for how we get ourselves out of this mess over the next 50, 60 years. Economically, he gets into the detail of how cryptocurrencies can help, how carbon trading credits will help. It's incredible stuff. But I think that I read that and I sent it around to everyone in the team. I was like, we basically need to make this book happen, make this story happen, because things get bad, but it's really hopeful at the end. It's incredible. So yeah, do read Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future.
Yeah, needless to say, there will be a book list in the show notes, in case you were wondering. Of course, there will be. No, it's beautiful to know that, to be honest with you, because I do kind of think of the grim dark thing was us all going, shit. It's really fucked. Shit. And as we all do when something bad happens, when bad things happen, there's a period of time where you essentially mourn the thing that's happened. And then we come out the other side and we go, do you know what, actually, it's going to be okay to a degree. It's going to be okay. And so I'm with you. The first thing I thought when I saw the Hope Punk thing, I was like, that's every science fiction show ever. That's every science fiction story. That's every fantasy story ever. Is
look at Star Trek. You can't get a sort of cult series that's more about the basic goodness of humanity and other species and all working together, and
and that's why exactly, and that's why we'll always be a Trekkie over a Star Wars fan. Personally, also, it's incredible to watch the original series of Star Trek and see how many kind of popular films, popular books, popular TV shows are essentially really long versions of one episode of Star Trek from the 1960s. But I digress, because I could talk about Star Trek for way too long. And for whatever reason, that's not what we're here to talk about exactly. But One last question I will ask you, because this is the format I have given myself, because you've already given us some wonderful moments of hope. But my theory that creatives need strategy and vice versa, do you agree? What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, 100%. And I'll go back to sort of what I said at the beginning about, I'd go further and say that you can't have one without the other. They are the same thing. So
Stop trying to
stop
separate
trying
them.
to separate them. And if you want to do the process well, or if you agree that strategy and creative in combination are about genuinely helping a client solve the problem that they should have identified in the brief, then you sort of have to accept that they are both integrated parts of that process of understanding the problem and finding the solution. So I'm insistent that strategy and creative are the same thing, and then there is a process of bringing that solution to life artistically and through the craft of whatever sort of format or channel you're using. And I almost try not to talk about strategy and creative. I talk about strategy and finding a solution, problem and solution, and then bringing solution to life. So
Yeah.
I try and put these other labels away and stay true to that.
It comes back to the language, doesn't it? The language we use for ourselves, it really has massive impact on the way that we think about things. And as soon as you put it in that format, it's quite clear. It's so obvious when you say problem, challenge, execution, essentially. So that gives me hope.
Good.
So that's so kind of you to do so.
I'm always happy to bring that spirit of optimism.
And wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Stu. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And also, thank you for Blurred. And thank you, all the Blurred team, for doing incredible work, because we stand.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you to my team. They're amazing.